Good morning again, Rinpoche. Tashi Tale. Good morning, Katrina. Thank you for translating for us. And welcome to everyone who's participating online. Please make a note that there will be no class next Monday due to the July 4th holiday, but we'll resume on July 14th at 9 a.m. And the link for the prayers that we'll do this morning is in the chat box, so now we'll begin.
To the teacher and Tao, transcendent destroyer, oneness God, full destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, nor the world's supreme guide of beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans, to you, the Buddha and Tao, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakti Muni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you, her wise, that I bow. With pure bodies, form supremely fine, wisdom motion like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner, the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame, a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble, a dream, a flash, a lightning, a cloud, we condition things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all-seeing, subdue the four faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, 4 lands, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Nirayatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Oh yeah. Then Aggregates, what in Bakas. Geshe Yeshe Ranger Trabai, Sarah. Geshe Yeshe Ranger Trabai. Nenju Chakbar Kiva, Teve chance. Kanshi miru kene tikbata kibatini cherab lumbala sir. Pena mi kyobo chik. Tswala soba kanga kyobo shivche. Kolya nöjech yobache. Nöjech de sei bache. Tili rambuchi pe tsachimbu shivdende kyanche treshabchi yobayina. Kodi hama goche, koran kyobo shirara. Di kenyi lusadabda, tsokwa lusadabda nöjech shabayina sirwa. Pe pangbu tsigirwa. Koran kyobo re. Kake marata koli rindan chimbu shivchi yora. Di pa pecho yobu cheshina. Neko pe kusum soga shivchin gyore yore. Dina kodi hake kuyo mara. Yabu yimbata ke seta rambuchi kari na akuma. Ko tsokwa lusinda kenyi lusarutinda chepe chucheta. Di chane judemba awo pe pangbu re sira. Chima ko hako na chi sarate pecho chiyama chura. O tichidu pe teshindu suwara. Kanshi sirni rinjen trebayi ngengyu chakbar kibate. Ngengyu kyuba kyu sarabche. Ya, haa kyuba kyu sarabche. O tende cheba tele chans. Ya kenyi lusi chesine mandi samar. Ngengyu chakbar kiba tele chans. Kanshi miru kene tikbata kibate ni cherab lumbalas. Ngarazu mangchaji. Tendola sokbata kiwa dhamma memba mamu nigirwa. Dewa jetan joba chu sami milu takbarish towe ke omar. Tari leji topderwa. Tarinda pe sabso shabuchache. Roa. Shimiru gentibara che rablimbola petine. Ti tagasi sendi chibutanda tsochu tigbara sache ne tsochu na. Pe pambura. Rangi lutin shibuchi tsachibuchi. Rangi maambada tadakari ne yabu shibuchi soya niba yora rangale. Di niba yuba hama ko che. O tinde mesi temi chusu su sendi chibutanda tsochu wina. Pe pambura esungdo. Oya. Chi rab lumbala. Lumbu nang lumbura esungdo. Mujir.
So here, as it is said, whoever, if they were to have a golden vessel encrusted with jewels, if they were to use that as a receptacle for their vomit, someone who, having been born a human being, engages in negative activities, they are even stupider. They are even more foolish. So here, while we have been born as a human being, we should be using this life that we have right now in order to do something meaningful. So here, if you had like a poor person who has this vessel that is made of gold, that is encrusted with all kind of jewels, but they don't recognize the value of the thing that they have, and they were to use that vessel, say, to put their trash in or for something really dirty and gross, it would be such a waste for this person who is really suffering and struggling to have something that is so valuable, but they don't recognize the value of what they have. And so instead they use it for just all kinds of dirty things. So no one would want to use it again, like a place to vomit into or for dirty, sort of gross things. So we would see as worldly people that as being very stupid to have the ability to get out of your poverty, but to not use it as such, and instead use it for all kinds of things that are less than desirable. But so here, most of us right now, we have this human life with all of these leisures and endowments, but most of the time we take births as, say, animals or in positions where we don't have such conducive conditions. We have just this once, right now, attained this kind of form on the basis of which we can accomplish great benefit for our future. So if we aren't careful, but we just sort of use this life for negative activities, for worldly things, for the things of just this life, then when we have the incredible ability to be able to benefit our future, really that is much stupider than the person with their golden vessel using it for trash, for rubbish. So right now, while we have this life, have all of the conducive circumstances to be able to practice the Dharma, to let that go to waste, to just engage in negative activities, pursuing the affairs of this life, it's basically the greatest stupidity of stupidity, the most foolish of the foolish.
Oh yeah. Oh, the ending arazu tanda miluto but sungwara. Oh, dilia ko sayeton ko chibutunda kanjalia so chu tia tibundra sa. And it teacher in a pepambo sungwara. Tanda Demba Chichagore, Sungora. Tanda Demba Karichagore Sene, Sanju Senada, Church of Yara. Church the Mancha Chit and the Koda, Puja Shed of Jeda, Chit and the Silkoda, Tito Marwa, Tisonam Saya Tundal Redarawa. In a thought the social Lunga Yisumlia, Jujutan. Migi wa randa shen la nue de pa nyuruta, randa shen la pen de ya maharuta, ti che uyora. Ti che ne tsen de le rang jiba yore. Kondu chon do de, nga je chon do de, tato chon do de, rwa mila chawa che de, nyur do de, mila chini kanyo ki pendo che chagre. Ti ne suso ki mila jiba yungura, rangyam don rongge do zule ti ji yungura. Ti mene chodam betum bache, so cheba machem bolan balon, chun chama chizu, kanten de chendi tonda chunju chik tonda liya. Atin reshe chedan, so e kibu yo amare. Chamaru chagre, mi kanga katange maa chagre, ra. Ne so nyamdo dange so e, kondu sabu che, mi jiba so chagra. Chado che, kondu che, nga je che, ti che ne. O ti yende, che se de chendi liya, ran tebo, shen tebo, tumbu jambada tsewe tohne neya. Tene bala tene kiawa chima, ane lada mihi kiawa toya tanga, teta ring jawa kiawa chima yang tendeshi tene konda pewa chi ungre ese. Te sonzan dida chima niga le koya chi cho de rede wara. Kaji samdi zan cho situ, chima mado tsen dili cho chene nigu iwe sora che, pendo mewe sora samu koda. O ti mara, tsete zora, zo sosu lunga yisum, chodan tumba, jambada tsewa, rawa shenla tsewa mazi pamba tuba chi chebe na. Soso ya kiba yore, tsendili ya. Ani mi rang nyamdo dege zo ya kiba yore, tsendili rang tigiri, tigi sayati ta, tenso haku doa. Chi penjo, jangjang ka chi pengme doa. Penjo mambu yona nga je chero chin, teni tado chero chin, simba mi kiba cheche, kora desha ji samlo tang tange, ratu nye kyong kare kare chego samsang, simbre nal nye kulma kuda tinda chekwa chawi wara. Sa koti jangjang susu meche de tiki yunga tunda liya, chigi yuna rwa. Tinda che tam hatumba che che tiki yunga yinbe kechare de tunga yunga kyula dhuwa wara. Samla tangtang de susu liya wuchi kuyi samki ti chigi wara. Ina nga je chadon ten simla soba, che tam betimbe chawa tazul tsobe na, rāl tiki yunga mara, neba yunga wara, rāla ne shala ne yunga wara. O ti indi zang ko kar sura. Shwe di kar sura, tikba. Ta miki waro, shen, che suna tiki ta liyan rosong, peche na doda. Ti che maare se, kare se ne, sobu kale si chi kyab chi chi che ne, ti che maare se. Che se ade shala neba pangpa tang. Shala penpa drupa, ti reji kwa re song doa. O ti indi, sosu tenche umili ti, tundan denpa chik. Rwa, yunga la yani che ta tuba kusum ki chuba sambu che wu res. Ti ma jane pe pangbu res song doa. Ya.
So, here, right now, we have this kind of life with all of the freedoms, the endowments to be able to practice the Dharma. And so, if we are to just make efforts to get our food and clothes and necessities and sustain ourselves, really, that is quite a waste. That's quite sad to use our life that is so precious for things just of this life, just to be able to maintain ourselves. But really, when we talk about doing the Dharma is about doing good deeds. Often when we think about the Dharma, we think, oh, doing prayers, doing pujas, those sorts of activities. Those are really to increase our merit, increase that store of positivity. But the essence of Dharma is to reduce harm to others by watching the activities of our body, speech, and mind to, as much as we can, engage in a positive way with others and not harm them in any way. So here, when we are able to do that, to reduce the ways in which we act harmfully toward others, then this benefits us in this life as well. This is something that is beneficial for our future lives, but it also reduces our anger, reduces our pride, reduces our jealousy. It makes us happier in our life right now, and we benefit those around us by our practice of the Dharma. So if we act in this way, where we make an effort to not create harm for others, and we do as much as we can to be of benefit to them, we are going to have more more friends. We are going to have a more harmonious and loving kind of an existence with fewer enemies, and so forth. But if we just sort of follow after doing whatever we want, thinking, oh, I'm going to get happiness from things or from accomplishing, sort of following after our afflictions, we'll have more enemies. We'll have more criticism. We will go through the world with more anger and more pride and more jealousy, and really suffer more in the present as a result. So to act in ways that promote our sort of having harmony and affection with others, that's really what we mean by doing the Dharma. It's something that doing the Dharma is about benefiting ourselves in the present as well as in the future. And really, this is to act, the main sort of essence of Dharma is to act with our three doors in ways that are not harmful to others, that in as much as we are able to benefit them. And so here and now, that is going to bring us peace and happiness. It's not as though we are able to gain happiness from having wealth. We can see that people can get lots of wealth, but then there's all of that that comes with it, trying to defend that wealth, trying to get rid of your enemies, trying to make sure that you protect that. And in the course of doing so, you engage in all kinds of negative actions, not recognizing the kind of future suffering that that will bring. So we think that we are getting our happiness through that, but we're actually creating the conditions for our suffering. And so here, when we harm others, we end up harming ourselves. We are creating the conditions to experience more suffering. That's really what non-virtue is about, as we have been discussing above. When we engage in those kinds of activities, that create harm for others and that are not beneficial, then we are going to experience suffering as a result. So really, the difference between Dharma and non-Dharma, Dharma isn't just doing physical austerities, as we saw before, but it is rather the abandoning of harming others and doing as much as we can to benefit them. So knowing that and really implementing that in how we live our lives is the essence of the Dharma.
Oh, yeah. 어떤 데고 산재 송거도 디베지한 메자신 개와프 숨속버스 랑게 셈네 용서 된데 산재 템바이스 산재게 롱기 템바도 똑베 템바니요라 롱기 템바스 소소 쳬니 테바시 삼르다 똑베 템바쟁게요라 디나시 소소 냠레 치니칸데 소소 냠레 쳬베나 아니 마르 똑베 템바쟁게요라 롱라 쳬니 산재 송년 셰셰데 산재기 담바 쟁겨라 롱기 담바 쟁겨라 제 전다디 진이고 소소 냠니도 셰티 제베나 또베 담바 쟁겨라 산재 담바든 제기요래 어디인데 디버지야 메샤시스데 샹라 제베토네 샹리아 너버지야 메샤시스라 샹라 동해 중에 규지야 메샤시스 교화 부송 소바제 샹리아 팬토가 대화 중에 주 천대다 치마를 대화 중에 주 가리나 뒤쪽에서도 교화 부순 소리 랑게 셈니 원선도 때인데 당부서서 셈디 꿀론데 셈디 야부여거라 셈디 야부진 들소나 아니 령아 저번 들라데 용거라 셈디 경보체 차다 니르다 강가 경보체나 니 령아 저번 정부 용거라 어디엔도 고 구숨 양당바 처와 방배토네 샹라 잠제 꾸네라데로 참 저에 꾸네라데 샹라 처와 너버치니 봐 샹배 대화던 트렌드지 샹배 꾸네라데 샹라 치니 팬도 주서 대가체로 체로 다네 네 동해 탐제다 저 타르바토바 차기 심제신다 삼마 대화 타르토 버산제 요코반 포도 토바 차기 심텐데 삼류야 가게 고요라 어디인데 대산계 손바나신게 된데 소소 쉐딩에네 고숨 저바 사르 다로 냠바든 요르 다네 된데신데 타바 심제 라치부ton다 마이 바 심제 탐제가 쭉 통되게 그것에 연대 군대지 강사실은 좋아서 인삼 대체도 쇼년게 인삼 군노세 때문에 서버쇼서
So here, when we talk about the Dharma that was taught by the Buddha Dharma can be subsumed in the Dharma of scriptures and the Dharma of realizations. So scriptures refers to that which we explain and which we hear, and it is based upon holding those scriptures, engaging with those scriptures, that we can give rise to realizations. When we then engage in the practice of those meanings, we are able to uphold the Dharma of realizations. So we we have met with the Dharma, we have that opportunity to both uphold the kind of scriptures as well as the realizations. So here, as the Buddha has said in what we just recited, do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So we should not do anything that is the cause of suffering for ourselves or for others. And so we should avoid anything that is a negative action in that it is the cause of suffering, and do whatever is the cause of happiness, both in this life and the future. And if we allow our minds to just sort of proceed as they do, be wild and unruly, then we are going to run into troubles. But by subduing, by taming the mind, then we are able to proceed according to the Buddha's teachings. So if we, by a function of developing our mind, by looking at others with this sense of compassion, wishing to free them from their suffering and actually acting in ways that will do so, as well as trying to develop this sense of love for others, these are the kinds of attitudes that one increases and expands more and more, eventually wishing for all sentient beings to have that highest, most definite good of Buddhahood. And so we listen to the teachings, and based upon that, we work with our own mind. We expand and develop those attitudes until we reach that highest state. So here we should undertake, we should set a motivation for listening to these teachings, thinking that it is not just for our own happiness, but rather to be able to bring all sentient beings to this highest happiness. I'm striving to accomplish the state of Buddhahood. In order to be able to do that, I am going to listen to these teachings.
오야 당한주데 참데 될래요 봐. 쇼로가 니시 잡게데 그래서 친차서 어다티 마치로 시엔데 제가라나. 이 다에 다기를 예체 봐세. 다에 바로와 다기 예체 봐. 걔네 담배 돈도 걔네 담배 걔네 담배 돈도 로서. 당하라도 데 고대야 전에 근데 삼로단에 하고 있어도 Nagarjuna namju lo lenje na le so so rangshin samlo khote de nga samsa samlis ko do wa ene nga samsa do nga chin nang do wa o je nang dang de ka de do ta du san namju ne nga se de rawa de nang yo ra so bu de nge so bu re se ro nge semba re se ro nga de tele lo so ra chi yo ba chi samlo ko do wa rawa do chi ngay se de sa ngay lu se yang ko na rang ro chi ge wa che o tinde samlo ko ra na shin ge nga de yo ma re temper me ba sung do nga ran ju to na shin nga sam sa nga ye sam sa nga de rang wa chik ma bo che chok ba la ten ne pa le pa tak ba sam le sha ba ma yin ba rang wa che ba nga ju nam ju sam lo na do wa o tinde de yo ma re sung ge wa ra temper yo ma re ti chum ba re Tonashi temper mara chumbares, temper matubares, and the tonashi. That is the Taye, Tagir Yeche Base, or Tendena do some locoyateta, Tendenashi to the mountain, Tende Yoris and Gemma to do such Niga Cochora. Tende Tambeton do lose, Tende Samlote, Tanashi, Samloco Nashi, one net and it in a she or mares. Don't tumble to only tende nashi yo mare sora. Tambeton do lopa rese. Chinji lore tinashi yo mare sora. One tranelba. Venezuela, Maradu Sambati nashi yo mare sora. Then tambeton do los. Lokwa rese, chumba rese, yamba marese. Ene, kanshi yangda chidawa. Kanshi yangda chidawa. Yonso sheba. Yimi jonsigwa. También tanto lo será. No, tati. Tagi yochwa, chimbares, loparesera. Caresna, nada, ngai, what a sambana shiggy round, she ever in us. And the Kagres and the Sejutan and Dirishas do such a Tausuba, Chesuba. Ranju samle na kora na shi na de ran chi yo na so bole lo so yo ba ta bi ra Similar laws you have tabachi. Toran doshin dosiloso, Pumbungata, Talian Rosa, Pumbungata, Sai Jua, Chu Jua, Major, Lungi Jua, La Soba, Tosu Sopu, Tada, Shata, Desude, Pet the Logachi, Losu Yavachi, Mota de Yamata, Soba. Today you're not a cabandos, Rene Nico Yara, Tausuba, Chesuba, the Tisiora, Tausu to Truba, Chesu to Truba. Ti tawtun tsayasik tuwa, pechanal mambu ti yona, diriben, dile losu yore bese, tinde chende tsayshu tang tuwa, tawtun tsayag yora, nanzo semki takwa na shinti yona, ta ti tsayag yora. Ti mindu si diri chini rao yo mara, sobu ti mare, semti mare, diri chani, ta yingi chi yo mara. Ani lu sobu ta sem ta tazula pe loga chi. Tata pāngā nāshī lōgā chī yō na tē yō mā rā. Tē lū lē lō sū tā chī lōgā yō na, lū lē nā tā chū, lū lē mē tē wā chū na tā nā wā tā, tū ngē dū, nā kī dū sē tē yō ngā mā rā. Tā tē pē sōpū tā pē kā kā yō na, tā pāngā nāshī kā kā yō na. Tē mē sā kō sōpū nā tū tā nā wā tē shā kō tō wā. Sīmbā kī mā kī shī tū tā kī mā kī shā kō tō wā. Semba sangma sa chidu sa taade sangbu mi sangbu re nyabara sa shaagu towa. Sa ko tela tene pa taa shaba chiwa re. Tetsu chawa cheba tene taaga chawa cheba nduwa ra. Taade pe tele loos chiwa ne ko lega chiwa te sopo ta kane kejo shaya ta tetsu chiwa te taaga cheba nduwa ma ra ko. Taade pe tele loos chiwa ne siwa ra. O ti duka sura. Tende tse na Susu samba nashi yo na tse na nye yo kore, tak su tu, che su tu chuba yo kore es. Ti yo na, ne pakwe nyamsha tongpa ni tse ne ra, ne pakwe nyamsha shik si tu san, o di re es che, kanga rangwa chi si ku re, ti si ki yo ma res. Pakwe nyamsha shik, nga tu tsao shirib te zuna yo ba, kanga te ji driba ju gawa mi ju cheba ma to ome, tada driba nir shi ye se. Pakwe nyamsha si tu san, nga tu tong te ka nam ki kunzu be chu, driba tu su kanga shi ruwa ra, tongpa si yo go ra. O ti chi lam na maang da sa, ya, o di ka sa. Ti chi yang da chi da wa yong su she ba ni me ju sa. Ya, tan di ala chi lam na ma ta maang da sa, ya.
So here, picking up from where we had left off in the text, we will pick up here with verse 28. I think we were coming from 29, but we will begin with this 28, where it says, ultimately, the notions I exist and what is mine exists are false because, from the perspective of knowing things as they truly are, there is neither I nor mine. So here, these notions of I and mine, when we look at our innate mind, when we have this thought of I, there is an I that appears to us as though it had this kind of independent, autonomous existence. Like we think, okay, this is my body and my mind, and so forth. So there is this I that is the like possessor of those, that somehow is separate and apart. And there's this sense of mine as being really, truly existent as well. So here, what it is getting at, where it says that these ultimately are false, is because there is no such I as we think that it exists. That I seems like it is autonomous, like it is somehow existent in and of its own right, not being dependent upon being designated on a collection of parts, a collection of causes and conditions. So in reality, in actuality, that notion of I and mine is mistaken. It doesn't actually accord with the way that things are. And so therefore it is called false. It is known to be false. And so here, when we think about if the I existed in the way that it appears, we would have to be able to find something. It would have to be something that stood up to analysis, that was able to bear scrutiny. So here, if we look within the kind of collection, as we were talking about before, the collection of the 5 aggregates, form and consciousness, feeling, discrimination, and karmic formations, and the 4 elements as well, there's nothing that we can point to within each of those that is this I. It seems as though there is this I that is something separate, apart, that it's able to find or sort of stand up to analysis. But like as we examine in the texts, when we look for the basis of designation, or we look for the thing so designated, sorry, within the basis of designation, we can't actually find it. We go through and try to look for that thing, and it's not within any of the parts, but nor could it be something separate and totally apart from that basis of designation, sort of like an ox and a cow. If that were the case, that the I and the various aggregates were totally separate in that way, then when the body was sick, you couldn't say, well, I'm sick, because there's no connection between those two things. Or if you feel happy, the mind feels happy, you can't say, I'm happy, or I'm good, I'm bad. All of those kinds of things would be illogical because there's no connection between the I and the various aggregates. And so here, when we look at the kind of when we think about the way that this works, if it were the case that there were an I that were totally separate and apart, the actions of the aggregates, the various functioning of the aggregates would not be related to that I. You couldn't say, well, I'm doing this. So here, if we examine, we can see that this I does not exist in the way that it appears. If it were to exist in that way, in reality, then it would have to be findable by analysis. Particularly, it would have to be seen within an Arya's meditative equipoise that is realizing the truth of things. As we see in Nagarjuna's the homage at the beginning of the fundamental verses on the middle way, he talks about not coming, not going, and so forth, and the stilling, stilling of all elaborations, or the pacification of all elaborations. So within that meditative equipoise of an Arya, there is no elaboration of true existence. They see reality as it is. And so too, when we examine, when we try to look for the I and the mine, we can't find them as they appear to us.
Oh yeah. 어디 다 등한 줄로 나와나 시유나 다다 그 아니부터 네 째나 가드레서 제주던 거라 째네 니지 라서는 때 라버데 공그와 야네 안도 공네네 파베냠샤 시그 생물이야 다다 그 아니도 여고라 또도 째네 쟁게데 야 공네 여나 여거니 매나 매바니 고라 진행게 로데 공공공데 무슨도 또디 라는 이거 다다 그 라와도 두바데 라고라 세고라 디세 말에서고라 강실이 양다 지다와 관계실이 주장 양다바 뭐 내로 타도 양다바 지다와 신도 세배 용수 또바 세배 파베냠샤 이시기 삼무나 나다 나이와니디 요 말에서고라 나다 나이와니디 나주 삼바나시 예메 제주다 다든제 네 여나 여바 매나 매바 타제 공공공공네 터둥을 숨도 동게 지와라 어디 승문하더니 여고래서 랑원에 여나 지 매장 따뜻한 말아되는 동바치 세계가 말도 다다 다기 아니지 세계가 말에 신의 랑원에 주베 세고야라 어디 지람나니 대상 쇼로같이 된데도 오야
So, here, if it were the case that the I and the mine existed as they appear to us, existed inherently, then it would have to be something that is findable within that basis of designation. We would be able to point to and say, well, there it is. And then based upon habituating the mind to that, meditating on that, you should be able to come to a direct realization of the existence of such an I and a mine. But they don't actually exist. In reality, when you search within that basis of designation for the thing so designated, you can't find it. So there's sort of two options here. We can, in this searching, either find that thing or not find it. And so here, when it comes to they're existing from their own side, they should be findable if we were able to locate them. But the reality is that they are false. They don't have that kind of existence. So here, it would have to be the case that if these were inherently existent, then they would appear, they would be seen by Arya's meditative equipoise and in this direct, correct way. But given that they are not visible to that, then there is neither the I or the mine in reality.
오야 더 단데 땅만 셔야지 양자 두고야라 rāngwēni chūpa diwa mā rēsē, tī chūpa diwa rā. Dī kār sōngu dōsa nā, ngā rāzī lē chūng phōngbō nām sē dōwa. Ngā rāzī phōngbō ngā bō tō tō tā kāntā sēni chōng rēsē nā, tōme mā rē bē kūne lā nīpa tō chī kī lē sā nī mē tā lā tā lā mā tō chū kī kī wā rā. Ngā rāzī lē chūng sē, ngā rāzī kī phōngbō tā kī kia wā tī kār lē tēni chōng rēsē nā, tōme mā rē bā ngā samsā ngā rāngwā chī yō bā tsī bē lō tē kī kūne lā nē nē lē kī tī nī sā tē lē tēni yōng kī wā rā. Sō sō phōngbō tē, rāngyū kunchū tēmbā lē tēni chōng kū rā, nyōmō lē tēni chōng kū rā, o tī sōnzā kā sō rā. Ngā rāzī lē chōng sē tē rā, phōngbō ngā bō tē, ngā rāzī lē chōng phōngbō nām sē. Kowe nē lū lōngchū sāma tōme mā rē bē kūne lā nē yōng kī wā rā, o tī sōnzā tē kēng kī lē sā nē, tē lē tēni drēbū sāngē yōng kī wā. Ngā rāzī lē chōng sē, phōngbō nām sē. Suki pumbu ina dra, sowa dewa tunga ina dra, rwa. Ane samru tanda ina dra, mi ina mi samru tanda mendra yora, tandru ina tandru samru tanda, soku le tempa chigi ko mendra yora. Suki pumbu sowa bundu chibu, o tesu sama yonga de, tangpo yonsa de, tome mari beku ne lani yondu, nga samsa nga rawa tu truban chimba, ngai se, ngai wa rawa tu truban chimba, tele tene, ane kidegi le sa ni yongu yora, wasi wara. Nga zin, le chung pumbu nam se, nene te kare, nganzin tene, tondo chun sikdwa, ti nganzin te, nga samsa nga rawa truban zimba de chumba re songa, tal she sa songa, kun zimba na shi yo mara, chungli yo mara, su lokpa re se, chinji lo re se, she sa ra, ta nganzin tene sora, tondo chun se, nga rawa truban zimba nganzin te, tondo chumba re koran zimba na shi, tonga na shi, samba na shi yo mara se, nāngzū nē shī tōng lē tīndō shī nē yō mā rē sē, tōng lē nē tāng tē shiandā shī nē wā rē, shē zā kō tsūmbā tōng bē wā rē sē wā rā. Ngā zē tē nē tōng tō tsūng sē, nē kāngi sābyō tsūmbā tē kia wā tēmbā kālā shē sē, sābyō tē mā sō nē kio yu tsā wā tē ngā zē tē rā wā. Ngā zē kōrā tē ngā rāngwā nē trūpa zimbā zimbā kōrā tō nōr tē tō wā, rāngwā tō trūpa chī yō bā sām nē rāngwā tō trūpa yō mā rā wā. Tī mē nā tē kī gyū chē bā lē tē nē chōng yā nē kāngsā tā phōngbō tā tē sō rāngwā tō trūpa chī kawā yōng kū rē sī wā rā. Sābyō gyū kōrā tē rāngwā tō trūpa mē bā chī rī yā, tē lē tē nē chōng yā tē kī tē bū tē lā rāngwā tō trūpa phōngbō tā rāngwā tō trūpa tā tē yōng kū mā rē sī yā tō tā rā. Rī tō wā, tsūmbā tē kia wā tēmbā kālā shī yō tē yō mā rē sī yā tō tā rā, yā tē chī lā mā.
So here then, proceeding to verse 29, again, this is establishing that this is not, this I, this mind does not exist from its own side in the way that it appears to us. So here in verse 29, it reads, the aggregates arise from I grasping. The I grasping is ultimately unreal. How can there really be any arising of that whose seed is unreal? So here, the aggregates that we have, our form and feelings and so forth, these all arise from this fundamental ignorance. We have that ignorance, and then based upon that, we engage in various karmas, positive and negative actions, which in turn then cause us to take up a particular birth. So it is from that thought of I that we then accumulate karma that then causes us to cycle, to take rebirth. So it comes from that unreal notion of I. And so here, when it comes to all that is within samsara, all of the abodes, the sort of enjoyments and beings as well, the root of this is our ignorance. So we have a kind of a particular sort of a form, and we feel like this is our form. We engage it, we have different sorts of feelings, we have a kind of way of thinking, and it's all of the various differences that we see within the world. These arise from the various kinds of karma that beings have created. So holding this I I to really truly exist, then due to that, we engage in non-virtuous actions, virtuous action. For the case that such an I existed in the way that it appears to us, we would have to be able to, as it was said before, find it. But this is not something that it is really truly existent. It is false in that it doesn't exist in the way that it appears, like an autonomous something that is existent from its own side. So here, if it is the case that this grasping at an I, this I grasping, is ultimately false, it is not established, then how could it possibly give rise to a result that is somehow really truly established? So here, if the cause is false, if the cause is mistaken, as in we perceive there to be an autonomously existent self, but it isn't actually established in that way, then if the cause is somehow false or mistaken, then how could it produce a really truly existent result? It doesn't have that kind of ability.
뭐야? 다다가 디보션 지기도 지기래. 야. 다티 제리아 가르도서나. 또 공부 대다른 메덴바라. 토네가지 봉아리 주로와. 공부 대다른 메덴바라 토네가지 봉아 주세. 공부 나다 네 따라서 봐대죠. 라와도 투바시 랑게 통게 요나 티나시 매바도 통소나로와 또 소나로와 공부 대다른 메덴바라 토네 간지 봉아 주. 대 공부가라서 봐다 다디 다다 다게와 공부가라서 봐라. 다다 다게와 공부가 니가지 랑원에 마주바 또네 대 공부라 때내시고라. 공부 대다른 메덴바라 토네 담부터 바체 삼바체 공바체 야네야도 공대 무슨도 통해 봐도 로라야 타투도 봐 토네 나제 뽕아 줘스 어디 공공 공내네 무슨도 또 소나 네 림베 공간세데 총으로 친제 타라네 때로 때네 뽕토고로 와 간세데 남중아중아 라와 나의 삼도 라와 치 삼로 코야데 매르차도로 와 그래서 나다 나이와 라와도 매바도 곰곰곰네 딱바리스티 곰데데 네 바로 제 무슨도 야또 테네 야야야다 야네야도 곰네 네 공간제데 묘 총으로 제 바로 칠게 매바차라 나 삼도 남중아중 삼도 라와지 삼그리트 삼도 다 취소네 삼도 동바도 사는 거라 때네 딱바 삼비 세치마도 단단한 생각을 라와도 차야 매래 죄송도 풍부 대다른 메덴바르 통네 간지 봉아 요르세 대 공발을 때네니 간지 사비데 제가 파판도 그래서라 봉도 그래서 네 간지 바다 판네네 치네 풍부 좀 주스 나리 zem바데 판소나 네 간지 배왕게 레사에 매버레도래 세바 매버레 거라 나리 zem바데 매나 나의 삼사 숙천부 신자체 세바데 매로와 세바 매버레나네 네마사 샹게 레유나 텔라 소tam게 티야 니버 첨부야 숙처로 당게 세바 매나 근데 겨울에 요마로와 겨울에서 토메 마리바 고여봐 아니 개바 세바 고여봐 고발 렘바 거라 세바들 렘바니데 매나 텔야 차신데 매나 티겨들 랑게 요마라 어디 인도 가서라 나진바네 봉아리요서라 나진바다 바네네 때네 풍부 좀 해줘 풍부라서 봐 사천년에 풍부르다 나진데 빠서나네 고야 풍부되는 거 말와 지당 한제 빠네 트라좀 버전에 고 풍부되는 거라 가사되라 고야 풍부 내년에 샤와천지 풍부 돌래 제고 봐대 기지 제고 봐대 양시 양직랑 지제 레전드 버저도 양직랑 맨다세 뛰어 말아 라와메 봐 기시 또다 어단디그래 어단디그도스 나제바다 뽕아 줘세 나제바다 나제바다 빠네네 때네 풍부 좀 때네 풍부 용 말해 겨울나야 용 말해 내가 녀면 봐와게 겨울나야 용 말아 풍부 용아요 말해 뭐야 뒤지도 내 따좀 봐세요 풍부 빠도라 뒤질라나
So then turning to verse 30, here it reads, seeing in that seeing in the way that the aggregates are unreal, one forsakes self-grasping. So here, when one comes to recognize that the five aggregates and the I, the self, those things that belong to the self are not existent in the way that they appear, that they are unreal, then this is how one forsakes self-grasping. First you hear about this, then you contemplate, and eventually meditating on that understanding, you come to a direct realization of emptiness or of the lack of any kind of self. And so normally we think I, and from that I, we then give rise to all of these other afflictions. Come to that kind of understanding, repeatedly, continuously kind of contemplating the fact that this I does not exist in the way that it appears. It seems like it has this kind of existence in and of itself, but really this I, when one comes to a kind of understanding of this self, is existent in as a dependent designation. It doesn't appear to us normally, like right now, to exist in that way, but it is through the habituation to this understanding, to the realization of the lack of such existence, that we are then able to, as it says here, get rid of, or one forsakes self-grasping. And due to forsaking self-grasping in the second half of 30, the afflictive aggregates do not arise again. So here, if you abandon that kind of grasp I, you abandon the process by which one takes rebirth, this kind of uncontrolled rebirth due to karma and the afflictions. So without particularly that ignorance grasping I, but also the eighth link in the 12 links of dependent origination, that craving which acts as the sort of nurturing agent to bring about a future rebirth. If you have eliminated that, if you no longer have craving the eighth link and grasping the ninth link, then there is no rebirth due to karma and the afflictions. So we will no longer be subject to taking up these contaminated, appropriated aggregates due to the force of karma and the afflictions. No longer having those samsaric aggregates, this uncontrolled rebirth wherein we are just sort of following after, but rather when one has seen this, due to forsaking that self-grasping, the afflictive aggregates do not arise again. Now there are those who have become Aryas who have not cast away those aggregates, or could be born in samsara, or born due to the force of prayer and so forth, but no longer will there be any of that uncontrolled rebirth due to ignorance and the afflictions that follow from that. So one who forsakes self-grasping no longer is taking up these afflictive aggregates.
Oh yeah. That did Humbu temban meba to wala tene, ti kom nene ngusum du to sona, tarra. Ane, tone, nganzi panjo, nganzi dis pandura. Nganzi kia meba chagra. Nga rawa te meba kom de nga rawa zimbe lo de meba chagra, pandu de chara. Tome maripa pandura. Nganzi de pan sona sora, nganzi pan pamajo. Nganzi pada panene, chini pumbu tene kewalaya pumbu yo mare. Mi pumbu nyawa ita tundula soba karina pumbu ngawati yunga yoma, kewalaya yomarwa. Kewalambala seba kuyiwa, keba seba kuba lemba kwara, tome marikwa de pansara, tiwanga niba tuzi le saya yomare. Ni ngema sasha batende yorba, tezu karesana, kewa toma mewane sasha mambu yora, kwa kochi kewada mikiwa mambu yora. Tezu ta di karsura, chu mengengi sakambuli, sabyon tende yune kia yomarwa. O tina shicheche ko seba de mena, nime le de ya niba tujen du chen ya drebu ke tuku yomara. Se dan trele yansi mesi do. Seba mena, seba yebe wange chi kewa da lingi wara chi tonya yoba da chi saya yoba raya yoba ra chi kona shasha de tende yoba chi ko lagi wara. Seba kona mena ani te linga yomarwa. Cha keba seba yomaru, kuba lemba yomaru, tome maru ba yomaru. Enti meden niban duzi le satu saya yomara. Nima saa shabate karchi urasana, se shabate niba tujin songe keba seba kuba lemba yomara. Chudi mewa nashiri, sa kambul ya sabu deba nashira. Debu meya mewa chagi wara. O te yende, chu kunju temba de pansara le da nyamu ni ti yong me so sara nyamu yo mara ti wang sabe le yo mara jebu tela tene yong ge ni pumbu nga ta la so ba kwa ba da pumbu ra me ba ke ra me ba tor ko de ma gu yo ra sa kyu tu gu ni de tunga temba da kunju temba ni kunju temba de pa tunga temba de pa ta tarwa thok do de so gu yo ra de do
Mm.
chi pumbu jung men ju se ne ka re se ne tarwa thok ba ta chi ne 동해지 풍부된 정도 말해서 근데는 동해 댐바다 군주 댐바니 빵배 타바토바래서 동해 댐바 빵사래 아니 군주 규대 빵사라 타바토바 주래서 와야 되지라면
So, here it is independence upon the kind of realization that we gain through meditating on the lack of inherent existence or the lack of autonomous self, that one is able to then get rid of that grasping at an I. And basically, once one eliminates that grasping at an I, then there is no further rebirth. One won't take rebirth as a human or a hungry ghost or a hell-being animal, any of that. Once you have eliminated that initial ignorance, you are no longer going to create new karmic formations. And due to that, one will no longer continue to take rebirth. One is also lacking the kind of craving that is necessary in order to nurture such karmic seeds into maturation. So, although it may be the case that we have many, many karmas that we have collected in the past, that we have accumulated in past lives, they no longer have the ability to bring forth results. It's sort of like if you have seeds in a desert, in a very dry place, there's no ability for them to give rise to a result because there's no water. There aren't the conditions for them to come to fruition. So, without craving, there is no rebirth. Once you have eliminated that ignorance, again, through seeing, through developing the antidote of our normal grasping at the I as being somehow autonomously, independently existent, is overcome through a realization of the opposite, through realizing that these aggregates and the I are not truly existent, then we have no longer are going to take rebirth. No longer is one going to create new karmas due to the force of that initial ignorance. So it's like, again, we may have those kinds of karmas that have been accumulated in the past, but without water, without the right conditions, they can't ripen. So here, as it says, one has abandoned both the sort of origin of suffering in the sense that no longer do you create karma due to ignorance. Once you get rid of that initial ignorance, then one has eliminated the origin of suffering, and so too the resultant suffering is cut off. No longer will you take up these contaminated, appropriated aggregates due to the force of karma and the afflictions. So therefore, this is liberation. There is the abandonment of both the origin of suffering as well as that suffering result itself. This is liberation from that.
오야 다 단다 데 단다 고고에 체크할 고고르스나 곰볼루 줍게트네 세버체 송도 와서 거라 아니 타르바 토발라 녀라나 쳐지 담에 또바 여마에서 저바 마부 연구하래 우마란주 바다 우마바카지야 지단 뇌마케데 동반이 또고르 시그마라 라원에 주베 동바 시그마 라원에 주베 요르 시겨라 때 우마란주 발레야 때 녀라 타좀 바토도 타좀 그래 녀모 방그레데 돈이 또고 말에 간사랑자도베 제기 다음에 버서지야 뜰에 라버를 또해요라 근데 또는 들이 마도 타바토발이야 쇼지 다음에 간사 풍부 다다 풍부니가 랑원에 매베 동반이 또고 말해서 근데 생각만 보여라 대좀 말은 공부를 그 공부는 시제나 택매는 쇼지 다음에 또 봐요서 택매서도 년도다 랑제니 됐은 거라 년도je lamla shukbata rangjeje lamla shune tarwa tomge yora otini nyege tarwa tobala tongbani togu dese dele ya timangbo yora nyerang jidu dode bada chidama tozoge luchene tongbani rangune tribe tongba toya yomara otina shicheje ya nyende lamla shuna rangjeje lamla shukbata zoge tongni tamote togu marese 근데 성경이 알았지 말해서 Goboludu sung na shi tangmalia, sung ba na shi chena. Tingmen la chuji tangmi toba yobati, sewa cha hako re esi. Ti shekdwa, ya ti chulamna.
So also, one thing we need to understand here, an important point is about the realization of emptiness. Again, this is something where the point of debate about the realization of the selflessness or emptiness of persons and phenomena is something that philosophical schools debate on. So there are those of the autonomists, the Svatantrikas, who would assert that hearers and solitary realizers, those pursuing the lesser vehicle, only realize a more coarse form of selflessness, the self's lacking a self-sufficient, substantially existent kind of existence, and they don't realize emptiness or the lack of true existence, according to some. So here, when it comes to this point, as elsewhere, we see that Nagarjuna is clear in stating that even those who are pursuing the path of the lesser vehicle, Stravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, have to realize the self and the aggregates as not truly existent. When we see that for lower schools, particularly like the Sutra school and the Vaibhashika school, that they don't assert there to be a realization of emptiness at all. But when it comes to the higher schools, there is some debate over this. Some of the autonomists would state that the hearers and solitary realizers, while they abandon the afflictive obscurations, they don't abandon the knowledge obscurations, and that is in part due to the level of their realization. But here, Nagarjuna has clearly stated that both vehicles necessarily realize the subtle selflessness of both persons and phenomena.
Oh, yeah. Hako wale. Tandiri dāngā Chitar melo tēne su se. Rāngshīn sungye nām yu je se. Melo chi yu na shēku tāsa chi na tēli pā tēne. Ane sungye tōngu rwa. Pīki tōngu tu tōngu rwa. Melo mē na ane tōngu ke yo mara. Tōla tā ane tsū chāya ke yo mara. Chitar melo tēne su se. Melo la tēne ane tōngu. Tōngu sungye di pīki tōngu rwa. Tōngu re se wara. Chitar melo tēne su. Rāngshīn sungye tōme je se. Sungye di Kurang ngone yinpa rasi, soso tōng ngone yinpa rasi tōngi rā. Tōngi rāb tōngi yinā tō kō ngone yinpa samgi wā Sengi tō tōge. Kurang sōngi tōng, tōmba chū nāl tōne. Pā tsik tsik chidō chū tsik tsik tōne, kō tīli chōmbe kēchi chāi wā rā. Shandā shin dū samche. Mita tō tōge tsamsāng chūgi dā wā kō tī tēnā tsamsāng pañyō kēp tīndi chik rā. Kō tī chidō. Tā mēlō la tēne, soso tōng de 그게 제신 송ye 제신도 나그래서 오늘 전에 동호인 번나시 나그라 송ye 마토도 요 말때 나라도 또또 된 잡은 저기로 신나로 제비게 때문에 때지 신나 잡으시고 제지 쉬지는 오늘도 요 말때 동호인 쉬 삼제 소소 시에 요라 참상을 가야 요라 참상 외에 요라 이제 송ye 마토도 개개 요 말아 이내 된 잡은 거네 때도 주제네 나기 와라. 시마도 비게까지 쉬네. 나야다 쪼야다 가야게 오마라. 네, 제신의 손이 제신도 나왔으라. 그래서 어디서 와라. 어디 가서도 선에 집에 멜로 때내서 랑신 손에 남으지. 손에 대문에 임바 제신의 손에 제신도 나왔으라. 그래서 강간 나기 와라. 동게 손에 대 동원에 임바 나시 나기 와라. 이당 원에 매바다 하고 와라 가족에. 내가 하고라. 다에 보충주래 가리는 것이 같아. 진짜 하고라. 때 하고 그래서 와라. 지다르 멜로 때내서 랑신 송에 남외제세. 전에 양다니도나 중세전에 요마티 오늘에 양다부 통원에 전에 제신 그 송에 제신도 요 말해서래. 나도 템버 매베 펠 샤위와 봐. 맨날 멜로다 제신 송에 신세르. 어때인데 melon dang cheshin ge sunye de melon la tene cheshin ge sunye de cheshin do nang ge rese indang ko na na shi yo ma rese go ra o chida melon tene so rashi sunye na me je tene yang da ni do na chung sa gen yo ma yin shi ya this is
So then turning next to verse 31, it reads here, this is giving an example. It says that depending upon a mirror, the reflection of one's face is seen, but it does not ultimately exist at all. So here, when we have like a reflection in a mirror, I mean, if we don't have a mirror, we are not able to get a reflection of our face. If we look at a stone, we're not going to get an appearance of a reflection. So when we have that condition of there being a mirror that allows for this, then when the condition comes together, we can see a reflection of our face in that mirror. Now, most of us understand that this is not real. It appears as just like our face, but it isn't actually such. However, we can see that with like certain animals, they are very confused by a reflection. Like they might, like a lion, for example, if they were to see a reflection of another lion, they might end up like trying to jump towards it and they jump into a pit, or they are sort of like batting at it, thinking that it is another animal. But for those of us who are of a certain age and are learned, it seems to be a real face, but we know that it is not a real face. We put our face in front of a mirror and we are going to see a reflection, but we can recognize that that's just a likeness. However, like we see this with film as well. I mean, the things that are happening in a film are not real, but we can still have a feeling of being very excited by something or very happy, or we can cry, we feel very sad. So here, no matter like someone in a movie might be getting hit or something, but it's not actually real. It's not happening, but it appears as like real. And so it is this case. This is the example of non-true existence that we see when we have our face and a mirror coming together. We see a reflection that is very much able to be used as a reflection, but it isn't an actual face. So we who are of a certain knowledge know better. I mean, maybe small children, and of course animals are still confused. But what is being illustrated here is the example of something that doesn't have true existence. In dependence upon the coming together of our face and a mirror, we have the appearance of something that seems like it's a real face, but it doesn't actually exist as such.
oh yeah oh da de so has ka so de chida melon tene so rashi sunye na me je de pe che ro cheshin sunye melon le ten cheshin sunye cheshin do nang ge de cheshin do tu gu ma re pe de shin do so ra cheshin pumbu nam tene se ngan je ba ne me ba jo pumbu le tene kana so bo re thon so na pa jo ka sa ngo so bo re thon so na tele tene ne ka sa de na ge wa ra 어, 대신 풍부남 때문에 나는 집안에 미벌 줄세. 소소 풍부라 메네 나 삼삼 미그리 미션다 소부지 통서 어찌지 랩송섬 간사데 여바데 랑위네 여바를 집에 소용기 여바 통비 알아. 랑위네 여바 여기 제신그 송내 제신도 나야 제신도 템바 메바신도 쓰거라. 간사 풍부라 때문에 간사서 랑와도 주버지 나기 와르데 풍부라 때문에 나와나시 간사데 랑와도 주버 요 말에 쓰거라 단다. 풍부 남라 마 대신 풍부 남 때문에 나는 집안에 미벌 줄세. 소부지 통안에 간사데 랩주사 소소 가르 지네 가세 메르지노 다들 랩선 소소 콘도사세 메르지네 통도 코도자데 랩선 삼사 땡기라 라와도 주버리 피네 요나샤기도 메반주스 티신 송에 랑게 신기 송에 신 양다니도 땡가메스 돈다 제신기 송에 멜론라 때네 제신기 송에 제신도 나야 제신도 나와다도 템바 메바신도 풍부라 때네 간사 라와지 나야 나와다도 간사 라와지 요 말에 세던다래 베테 낚시잖아 야 뒤질라나
So again, this is an example saying that when we have our face in a mirror, there is an appearance of a reflection that seems to be like our face, but that is merely a reflection. It doesn't exist as our face. So like it says in this verse 31, depending upon a mirror, the reflection of one's face is seen, but it does not ultimately exist at all. And likewise, depending on the aggregates, I grasping exists, but that I does not truly exist, just like the reflection of one's face. So here, when we see like the form of someone's aggregates, we can say, oh, I see that person, right? In dependence upon those aggregates, observing those, there appears to us a person that exists in and of their own right, like from their own side. It seems as though there is this like autonomous person existing, not dependent upon anything else. So when we observe the aggregates of another, like we see a person's form and we say, oh, so and so has arrived, or we see that person and we get angry, like, oh, that's the person I'm mad at, and it seems like they're really truly existent like that. In the same way that like a reflection of a face in a mirror appears as a face but doesn't actually exist as such, so too in dependence upon observing our aggregates, although it appears as though there is this person, this self that exists inherently or autonomously by its own force,
This
it
one.
doesn't actually exist in that way.
Oh. This one. Oh,
This song again, yeah,
yeah. Oh, that on that culture go to Senate. On the culture. Kansada Pumbu, they made to talk while attending to go in the dog race and Javashagora. Kans Pumbu Temba Zimbalatene, Koya Pumbu de Jungu race. Kansada Pumbu Temba, never told the Congo Combalatene, to get them by the Kunjun Tembani the dog race. Chase and draw out on dog when you the shagdoa. Chendru dog body. Pena doa time many the chase and draw a mayor to a Jungu race. Meten Dawson and a toy and dog to Risera, or Tinashi, the Tungetemba, Kunju Temba de Yona, Teletene, Yamota Leletene, Pumbuti Unguris Tungeteba. Tin Dawson and a Pumbuti Ungumada call a Tado, the Chendro, Cheso Rodo, the Shagdoa, or a teacher on the
So here, this realization of the lack of true existence, it is on the basis of that we are then able to abandon the two, the origin of suffering and the suffering result itself. And so here, this gets into the kind of the way in which we engage in samsara and the way in which we extricate ourselves from that. This has to do with a sort of causality. Like when we have fire, we are going to have smoke as a result of that. If you eliminate that cause, fire, then you're no longer going to have smoke. And so too, if we have eliminated the origin of suffering through this realization of the lack of true existence, of the lack of that kind of autonomous existence, first by hearing about it and contemplating on it, eventually meditating to the point where you gain a direct realization of that, that has the ability to then avert that basic cause of the origin of suffering. And without that, then we will be freed of the resultant suffering as well. So it's going to now turn to the kind of way in which we engage in samsara and get out of that, reverse that.
Oh, yeah. That don't that they car shagorasana. Melon chasing is on ye. Melola then chasing is on ye, chasing to Naya, chasing to Temper Mabades. Or chasing to Humbula Tene, and a task, Tinal task around to Trubachi Naya, tell it around to Trubayo Mares. Or Tipeduchan Shagora. Tata Pumbula Soba Chusa, Rangshin Truba Mede, Tension Rebel Join Beach. Pena Melona chasing is on ye, she is a peco yara. What better tene, and it turned out it Humbula ta Rangwin Trubanaya, Rangwin Trubayo Maris, Mede, Penapede, Melonala chasing is on your chasing to Naya, chasing to Tambamidoas, petition to this. What is Shegiora Tandati? That is Ramandi.
So here again, what is really being taught is that the way that we avert this. So when a face appears in a mirror, it appears like a face that is existent in and of itself. But we can recognize through understanding that it's just a reflection, that it doesn't actually exist in that way. And so too, when it comes to our aggregates and the self, although it is the case that they appear here to set it out as a syllogism, the person and the aggregates are empty of true existence, or sort of empty of inherent establishment because they are dependently originated, like for example, a reflection of a face in a mirror. And this is putting forth that reasoning of dependent origination, because like that example, although when you have the kind of causes and conditions come together, there is the appearance of a reflection of a face in a mirror, but it doesn't exist inherently or in and of itself autonomously. So too, the person and the aggregates, although they appear to have that kind of autonomous existence, they don't actually exist in that way.
오야 다 들려 개바 가시게 제신기 손에 제신도 메템바 떠야 돼야 내로 락바치레시 동이 락바치레시 인데 생게 와라 팀아르 송겨라 땡아라도 인치데 겜보 겜고서 강가게 뒤또 두고로 와 그래서 미치다 미강게 또 두라 부춘준에 있는 마도 지금 뒤내로게 말해서 동반이세 그 내로게 락바치게 말해서 지치다 미상마하고 두고래 어찌질라나는 데야
So there's also some scholars who would say that this kind of realization of a face in a reflection of a face in a mirror is sort of like a coarse realization of emptiness, realizing that that reflection is empty of being an actual face. However, it is the case that all who are of a certain age or have a certain amount of learning are able to directly understand this. So it's not really, it's put forth as an example, but it isn't like a coarse realization of emptiness, in that this is something that basically everyone is able to understand.
뭐야 저기서 지들 멜로 마텐 발송에 메나도를 대신 뽑으면 되대돼서 다던데 가르쳐 그랬으나 다던다 초대잖아 안에데 간사 추진에서 봐 라신지 주바 간사 추진 풍불을 때네 아니 간사 랑원에 주바 나야 랑원에 주바 매대 땡진 레버리 좋아이 배쳐 배나 멜로나가 지신기 송년신세 땡제기 따지 아니 땡반배가 주베 따지 시기 어려서 것도 야
So here, then it gets into sort of putting forth the syllogism that establishes this. So we could say, for example, a person, although they appear to be autonomously existent, are empty of such inherent or autonomous existent because they are dependent origination, like, for example, a reflection of a face in a mirror.
단다데 다데 하고 거라 단다 간사 추진에서 가지고 담아 간사데 수지 풍부 소야 풍부 드시 풍부 넘버 10의 풍부 대주 고도 간사 따봐라 딱시로 봐 소부치 고도 아니 때 소부 장장마도 선매제시는 지금 말로 간사를 말로 넘버 10의 고도 아니 초아주 고도 초아 대화다 동에 유야가 주는 두가 주는 초아 뒤도 연계주 고도 근데 도시 어디들에 되게 말해서 봐 도시에 버서 고도 가가 제시 버서 고도 자 수지 본부 초야 본부 도시 본부 넘버 10 본부 때 요거도 대강리 안에 소고 나리나 그 사이 좋아 로 추인 좋아 매인 좋아 롱게 좋아서 차게 차다 차부차 루발라 소바테서 다로와 추인 좋아서 차다 추세도 쓰거라 그네 사이 좋아서도 탁부터서 찾아서 오라. 추인 좋아서 매일 좋아서도 줘야 되서 오라. 줘면은 대토고 말아. 추인 좋아면서. 근데 롱이 좋아서라. 사추 매 롱세. 줘야 되고 요라. 롱디 고요 우정을 소바제 뒤땅고 요다. 지단다 고 남게 감대 거로 동산대. 동산 고요 요라. 나이 부가라 소바 코베나 동바 메나니 자나시네 소tuk 말와 우타tuk 말와 세코티 고고야라 대sol에 때는 메선부치 대요라 당당 알아서 메선부치는 미션이 돼야 되려 당시 만보 쉐부저라 대sol에 때전 rel내네 코디샤고요라 때전 rel내 다디샤고요라 마다 대sol에 때전 만데네 다치고 랑회네 데레스 주소서지요 말와 저 강가 땡제도 야보지 하고나 아니 동바도 야보하고 또 그러죠. 땡제 망부 삼을 동세도 땡제도 콜 카르카르 고도 카르카르 고도 라 동어부 간데지네 직바래 아데나 시와 아데 동부 소설 다나 해셔다 삼로 고대요라 나라데 간데지도 좀 소소도 간데도 따기요라 기타네 아버지 하고서나 지다르 켜지 다근 두시네 셰바 대신 꾸라 로차차 송고도 대타 소보치네 다가나시레 로 초아스네 다가나시 땅어부 강가 강바스네 다가나시레 메도스네 다가나시레 사추 멜로그 조망보실레 뜨진데네 아니 증아주 발레 바타나 아테 야부투스 바타기 얼마도 영원의 지주주사 찍게요 말에 라문에 요 말에 이나 땡진데네 마보주 초텔 때는 봐 레바 다시도 지 죽여라 콘주 내가 지도 내가 집을 샤고요라 강배 구제 전도스는 다 들었어오라 칸에 질라고도 다 깨지 세계서오라 소고대원면은 다 나샤 샤고라 다 tra샤세야 샤고도 자 대졸에 땡진데 내내 다게 지진용 대화용 동해용 다 선보리 기부도 강가 샤고도 직대 감나 뒤에 망보 초는 마도 저 고라 찍견견 뒤에서 찔 주소서요 말은 거 참아 뒤에 남보 수나야 땡데데 빼게 싶으시기도 땡베 닝부로 산게 좀 된대게 땡데레서 땡진데 버려 좋아서 동바레서 라와도 두베 동바레 소야데 배 투모 마이고 샹달 매시를 되어라 자고 땡진데 버려 좋아서 규단 깨라 땡진데 봐요 요래 닥시다 샤샤라 땡진데 봐요 요래 땡데들 니워라 규단 깨라 때는 요래 제 끼고도나 사추 메론 좋아 사변시 강가 전에 걸리걸야 태양 것도 자꾸 랑원에 가라서 따는 고라랑원에 드네 토요베스로 설교하라 고라사에 내가 부르줘야 저 토요베스로 설교하라 고고란 토요게요 말이 규단 깨데 그 따다 되시는 것도 말아서 사와천부터나 로마다 메도 간거 같이 차르고도 금도도 사와매도 야남사 저 정부를 사용고도 그 규단 깨를 때는 그 연구하라 때 하고도 자꾸 규단 깨를 차셰도 지 구조를 마냠야 페지 강가전에 진짜질에네 티 메토 닙샤 메토 야부샤르샤세로 강가샤고도 자 텐데데 야부 삼나네 쳐 강가를 찍버래 텐제 데버를 종아간 텐네 동반이도 셰송도 자와시름나 군볼로도 텐제 데버를 종아간 텐네 동반이 랑원에 동바레세 조조사 찍게요 말아 가라서 샘기치 초바질 지서 대치 야부도 두부도 봐 샤체 다가 차샤기 얼마다 지 두부데 간데도 예동한데 간데도 예도면 간데도 선 베네치 조조사지요 말아 가라서 대 연나라 샤기도 아마도 오인데 때제 데버를 종아가 되네 랑은에 동바래 땅에 매르베스나 요르다세 되네 때네 딱바데세 다시다 차셔도 저라 때네 데 메도레 데 강바레 데 강사레 라 데 소보레 데 컴퓨터레 데 남도레 스파타야도 어째 딱바나시 자와 챙게서 요래 자와 챙게 데레스 칠 주주세게 요 말에 콜로 요래 나로 따리 요래 에네로코 요래 땅게 미코 요래 마버지 고도 결단에니 안도서다 남도 풀세로 고 포게랑 시게 요 말에 그래서 강가 내가 지고라 하나 다 남도 풀소세 다 남도 밥소스마 쓰기도 코라 밤게랑 시게 요 말에 콜로다 미다 따르다 로다 따테나 마버 쇼요라 강가 지지 내가 지시도 내가 생게지 남도스 명지 따셔라 질 명지 따거라 내가 생게지 아니오라 남도난 루요 버거라 어디다 시 강가 봐 텐데데 망보 삼로 따나네 동바데 망 삼로 코토라 야 대실로 망다 스타디르
Okay. Um, So here, when it comes to this kind of understanding, we need, like when we have a person, there is the basis upon which that person is designated, right? We need to have these 5 aggregates, the form, feelings, consciousness, discernment, karmic formations. We need all of those together in order to be able to designate a person. Like if we have a form, but there's no consciousness, then we can't say that that's a person. That also needs to have the sort of faculty of discernment to be able to distinguish one thing from another. And so, and as we talked about before, that like even within the basis of designation itself, when we begin to look at the form appears maybe to exist from its own side, but again, the form is dependent upon various elements. Our body, our physical body, is made up of those components that have a kind of solidity, the earth element, the sort of water element in terms of the liquid within our body. We need to have heat, we need to have that fire element, as well as wind to be able to have motility within the body, to be able to breathe. We also need to have that empty space. Like if we were just sort of one solid thing, this body wouldn't actually work. And so being alive involves many different components and parts that are working together, that are really, it is a dependent origination. So here, when we think about this kind of dependent origination, any sort of object we can take as the sort of basis of investigation and understanding. Phenomena appear to us, like the self, the person appears to us as if it isn't dependently designated, that it isn't dependently originated, but that it has this kind of existence in and of itself. And so here, when we begin to investigate a dependent origination, doing so on the basis of the person can be very kind of impactful. It's a good way for us to come to this kind of understanding. And so here, when we have a collection of these aggregates, in dependence upon that, we give this sort of name. Oh, that's the person. And then we can say something like, when you speak, when you're using your voice, we say that I speak. Or when you feel sick, when the physical aggregate is sick, you're able to say, well, I'm sick. Or when you get better, you recover from that. Well, I've recovered. Well, when we have this feeling of there's being this I that is somehow like autonomous, that is independent. But when when we say like, well, I'm alive, I'm here, right? But we try to actually investigate and find that I, looking within all of the parts, within that basis of designation. We have to have that basis of designation, but when we begin to search within it, there's nothing that we can point to and say, oh, that is the person. It's right there. This is it. But rather, they are something that is merely dependently designated on these parts, this collection of parts. And so really this teaching of dependent origination is the essence of the Buddha's teachings. It's a unique teaching of the Buddha. There are different levels of dependent origination in the sense of causality. Phenomena are dependent upon causes and conditions. Like when we have a sprout arise, it seems like that sprout maybe comes like from its own side. It doesn't appear to us as though it has this kind of dependently originated existence or even dependently designated, but it's sort of like that thing. It just kind of pokes through the soil, it comes up, and there it is. But it is the case that all phenomena are dependent originations. When we look out, we can see this. Like for example, when it's hot, the leaves on the trees get wilted, they start to get limp, and it's not as though this is happening from its own side, but it is a matter of meeting with certain causes and conditions, and that is how phenomena function. So we look around in the world and we see these various conditions, like maybe it's been really hot and now all the flowers are wilting and things like that. It isn't just from their own side, but it is this dependent arising. And so as Nagarjuna has explained, whatever is dependently originated, that is explained as emptiness. And so here, when it comes to any sort of phenomenon, whether we are looking at ourselves, a person, or whether we are looking at something external, like a plane, a computer, a flower, any sort of other phenomena, it appears, those things appear to us as though they somehow existed in and of their own right, that they didn't depend upon their causes and conditions, that they didn't depend upon their various parts or on our mentally labeling them, but rather that they had this kind of existence in and of themselves, like a plane, like, oh, a plane just takes off and it's flying now. Well, that plane is dependent upon someone flying it, upon all of these various different parts, the wheels and the wings and the various computers and wires and so forth. And so, although it seems like there is something autonomous, something independent that is just there in and of itself, when we actually investigate and examine, we can see that the thing so designated doesn't exist. We can't actually find it. It is a mere name, a mere label that is given to this collection of various parts. So again, this is emphasizing the importance of the understanding of dependent origination, to come to an understanding of phenomena lacking that kind of autonomous existence that they appear to us to have.
다 되기래. 어때 다다 셔야 되는 것도 다다 셔기 와라. 아니 년기 와라. 터바 삼바셔라. 다들 양내 양도 삼을 당고 와라. 어때 레샤 삼 유샤네 게 된데시오 마라. 시라페요 마라. 다 삼을 당도 소소 삼을 당. 소소 나 세도 소소 나데 남주 삼을 건데 거기도. 디나네 콘도 세베 qab르시다 동해 중에 qab르시네 당아 삼상아 라와르 좀 미세 지치라. 저 단계도 저기 시나요서 또 저다 직진들이야 간데는 누구여라 집에 집에 쇼나는 가스도 가도 라와르 집에 텔레전 남주도 있지 여여르데 데세르스 통교라 지나 전부 용야다 가와 전부 깨야다 진짜급이야 저도 가도 소소 삼로 건데 땅도 삼 땅하지 때티나시 여래 말에서 삼로 땅하지 다가시 미기지 셰기도 수요 마샤지 소소 삼로 땅 로아 근데 다르지네 다 소소데 미젠 대어를 미젠 대야들이야 가르쳐셔 가르고도 로아 아 삼상아 미 삼상아 지지 삼상데 라와지요나 따따바 요새데 가반도 세기 와라 따톤 세세 강디네 지수지 봐도 삼루동서도 강베티네 제야 삼루단에 지 샤다르바다 짜다 추세다 마부여라 고베나나 제 자신인들을 벌어서 마부여라 그래서 레레레레레게 레데요 말 다래요 말아 드네 야동 고데체 레바데체 가가 삼다라 따til에 로스 양치 요르베 스타데 고베날 주댕게라지 나로도 바댕게 신다 저르세 제요 말아 지르바단 것이 너 나로 댕게 요르서 나게 집에 기부 딱바 집부랑 매매시 치미시 요새 요라 제가 좀 어디서 나바전에 제요 말아 딱바 지요나는 나의 매 차의 매 근데 대화매 동해매 근데 야구도 같아. 근데 주요나도 요 말아. 근데 저 삼루다. 근데 야다 등에 남주 삼루 코드나신 다데 근데 면도 삼루 코드. 남주 삼루 코드는 세대 면도 삼. 야데 삼루다 간세 야께주. 간세 깨주. 간세 깨주는 가도 간데 삼 코드도 다. 야데 나신도가 면도 다 따도 째네. 배잖아 손보나시로. 와. 소소소고 차셔테다 테마르 텔레 로스요 마르스 게 르바 삼르타 게레레레네 주레레레네 소고 차셔가 다르 마르와 어티데 텔레 셴도치 요르바스 테요 마르 게데 풍부남레 셴 풍부 생이 매버 주세도 풍부가데 바샤네 다 로가시요나 네 소고 나소나 다 나와서 마르와 소고야 로소나 강바 인데레전 로스나 다 로샤토 마르와 풍부레 대셔베 다시요나 근데 풍부 자와 가르쳐는데 다 자와 잡은 누구 마르와 풍부 거라 로가라 다들 로가시는 풍부레 대셔베 뭐다데 뭐부 세븐나시 따방라나시 라바예나시 라바예바예바레 예마요 마르와 라바예베 가르쳐베데 예발이야지 자와 잡은 누구 마르와 어쩌나시 풍부가래 빼 타데베 뭐 타데베 다 지요나 이 풍부 자와 제베데 다 자와 제베 너무 많아 나야 말에 사야 말에 로야 말에 대야 말에 칼라 사야 말에 칸에 게시해 말에 차로라 어제도 근데 삼다 야나야도 삼다 야나야도 삼다 오라 고메데 시에요라 고메데 시에요라 저바 삼바시데 곰자장으로 야나야도 곰거를 마도다 야 되지런다 근데 그래
So right now we are listening to teachings here about emptiness, about this idea of dependent origination, and looking at the way that the self appears to us, the way that this I appears to us. But we can't just sort of leave it at thinking or just having heard it and being like, oh yeah, it's just like that, sure, without actually examining for ourselves. And this really means coming in touch with that object that is to be negated, this object of negation, the I, that appears as though it were autonomous, independent, not dependent upon any sort of designation or parts. And so here, when we are, like, say, particularly afraid, when we have some kind of strong emotion, when we are angry, or when we are really happy, when we have something very joyful happen, particularly like we see there are those practitioners who go and practice in cemeteries. And this really can give rise to a kind of fear. And that sort of a strong emotion can help us to really get a sense of the way that that I appears to us. When we are really afraid or really angry or really excited about something, this I, in terms of how it appears as being sort of existent in and of its own right, is very clear. It can be very clear. And then we need to take that sort of I as it appears to us and do the thinking for ourselves, do the kind of investigation and analysis looking for this I as it appears to us. Like, well, where is it within all of these components that make up our body and mind complex, particularly like looking from the soles of our feet all the way up to the crown of our head? Is there something within our body that we can point to, like all of the muscle and bone and flesh and blood and so forth, all of the kind of internal organs within our body going through all of those components? Is there something that we can point to and say, well, there it is, that is the I, that self that I feel exists? Well, if going through this kind of process, we can't find anything to point to within those aggregates, and so we might have the thought, well, is it something else, something like apart from the aggregates, as outsiders or non-Buddhists assert a kind of self that is a permanent, unitary, autonomous self that is kind of the director of the aggregates, but somehow apart from that. Well, if that were the case, then it would be the case that our self, the I, would have no connection with the aggregates. So when our physical body is ill, we couldn't say, I'm sick. There wouldn't be any happiness or suffering because it is those aggregates who experience that. And so this I that I normally think of as existing in and of itself, we need to investigate. We need to analyze, can this such an I exist? And if it does, well, where is it within the body or the mind? And so when we look through the various parts of the aggregates, we can't find anything to point to. But so if we look outside of the aggregates, there's also nothing that we can point to. As it is said, I believe it's from Chandrakirti, that if it were the case that the I or the self were separate and apart from the aggregates, then it wouldn't have any of the characteristics of the aggregates. So we couldn't say, like, I'm going, I'm laying down, I'm thinking this, I'm happy, I'm sad, because all of those are characteristics or actions of the aggregates, and the I is separate and apart. The I, like if it were something like, blue and yellow, or an ox and a cow, our right hand and our left hand. Well, when our left hand is doing something, that's not the action of the right hand. If that is the kind of relationship that we have between the self and the aggregates, then again, the aggregates would have different characteristics than the I. And so when we engage with these teachings, when we listen to them, this is really intended as something that we then take up in our own individual investigation, looking for, like, identifying the way that the I appears to us and actually trying to find it. Can we find such an I?
뭐야 당연히 때리다 박박 끈가워 있네서도 더 끈가워서라 박박 끈가워 있네 대답하여 된토네 대답부에 된토네 동반이 셰베 된다도 토네 순고라 Chola make tose, Cholia, the Nelu Tombani Tobe, Musum do Tobe make Ishigi me, Shirabi me top Nasera, Donda Tombani Musum do Tone com Nasera. Chola make to Taniki, Kelonam dead me, Rangi com, Rangi Tachum Bedrebu Tobache, Kelon Shandala man, Shaya, Tachum Bedrebulia, Tabalia Gobachi or Esungora. Or the Tatunda de Carsos, Tony Tobate, and the Tarbato curious, Tarbatobal and never to Tombani Comgores. Tombani Combalatene, and then Yamonio do the Yamonio Dronane, Yamo Wangiles I am ever do Tarbatodora, Yamo Segura, Yamo Pansana Tabatora. Tarotops Shandashi Lumba Shandaram wrote in the Cheshire Omara, Carchigors and Yamo Pansana. Kondonga je shado and similar soba, Kansaka Zilla Sobara, Nanzilla Soba, Tezama Pansana, and the Trajan Bedrebu Top Cigarra. Teach an end, let a human bong around me by Kiolan at Yongumara. Oh, this is the Tombani Toba, the Tabe Curious, Tinyandeda, Rangeta, Su Tarbatona, Tombani Comgores, Tishagara. No, teach you learn.
So here, I'm not sure if I read the verse that says, without depending on the mirror, the reflection of one's face is not seen. Likewise, without depending on the aggregates, there is no notion of an I. But then we'll turn to verse 34, and it says, as long as one grasps the aggregates, or sorry, having heard this kind of topic, the Arya, Ananda, obtained the Dharma I. Then he himself taught this topic repeatedly to the monastics. So here, when it comes to the Arya, Ananda, he, having come to a direct realization of emptiness, obtained the Dharma I. And having done so, he was then able to attain this state of liberation. So here, when it comes to what this is teaching that emptiness, realization of emptiness is a necessity for liberation. To get out of this cycle of samsara, one necessarily needs to eliminate its causes. And it is the realization of emptiness that allows us to eliminate ignorance and the afflictions in order to be able to turn away from samsara. This is how we gain liberation. We shouldn't understand liberation as being like another country that we can apply to go to and we can just travel there, but rather it is from the development of this wisdom that is able to get rid of our afflictions that we gain this kind of liberation. So whoever it is, whether they are a Shravaka, Pratyeka Buddha, or a Bodhisattva, necessarily needs to have a realization of emptiness in order to be able to be liberated.
Oh, that and that Tarba Tobala, Tony Tokubade, Tony Tobalote, Tarba Tobe, Kuzo, Peke Chambure, some tea hako. The Karesana Tadon Zimbati, Yumokanga Kiwade, Nazu Hako with our patch. Some Ganji Shuchabachu, and Samsa. And then I will a chakwacha, and then I did so I dewa don't get on your sorbet you do so. So I dewa don't go to me, Kugume Samsa. Did somebody any on Gugara? Some around at the Mabaji come going to Komna, can they shoot somebody on Gumarwa? Then I talk about something other matters. Round I said, today shoot champion, you must shoot champion. Keep my shindora. Then you must show a law, you could. Time ever don't want it to talk with. Dharma Tombanya Tona, Yumo Chon Chodora, Yumo Chon Rosana, Yumo Sador, Yumo Sason, Tabatora. Quite your name, Chara. Oh, dear Bacha. That is Chile, I did it, Tamata, Corsa. Oh, that in a mancha. Koala Jugberin, but on Dogberin, but to the Shagua. And Koala Jugberin, but Qua could do Cantacogara. Koala and Togbala Caracarcha, that and the Tombani to the Shaswa. Oh, Geshe Yeshe, Tande Ma Chen Dilia. Chisi pumbu zen yoba tesi tela nganzi yo. Nganzi yo na yang le de tele yang ni kiawa yin si doa. Tandi kuwa la jugbe rinpa di shegi doa. Kuwa la jugbe rinpa di doa. Kuwa kudu condition korki yo re se. Ki kande re se na. Chisi pumbu zen yoba se. Chisi to pumbu. Ngara zu pumbu nga yo ra. Suji pumbu, choya pumbu, sobala pumbu nga yo ra. Pumbu rangshin ki truba zenpa yoba tesi to sigara. Chisi pumbu zen yoba. Te pa to pumbu tembar zenpe tenzi mabamba yoba tesi to nga samsa nga tembar zenpe tenzi te mabamba yoba re sigara. Chisi pumbu zen yoba tesi tela nga zen yos. Rangi pumbu to sokbo la sokbo ati soli ten sigara. Nga lu situ rawa doji samlu ko yara. Une chene rangi lu rawa chi yo marto. Lu liya kari yore sine. Meke ombo yore, nawe ombo yore, ne ombo, che ombo, luji ombo che. Tisu tama yora. Tisu tama la tenchen rene ane lu si shaw yora. Mato tina ne lu si ombo ngata tisu kanga yunkengi lu dire si chik tsu se ke yo mara. Tutren sode yora. Tutren mambu si sode yora. O tini chisi pungu zen yoba se. Chisi to pumbu rangshin ki truban zenpe tenzen yoba tisi to sigara. Tisi pumbu zen yoba tisi tela nganzen yose. Tisi pato tela nga samsa nga rangwa zenpe nganzen te ayungure sigara. Pumbu tembar zenpe tenzen yoba tisi to. Mari pumbu tembar zenpe tenzen yone. Ki tongpa ni tokbe shiro kumbala tena ko pang matsagi pato sigara. Tenzen de mabamba yoba tesi to sigara ta chonda. Chisi pumbu la tembar zenpe tenzen de te shingi meba to ne mabamba yoba tesi to sigara. Chisi pumbu de tesi de la nganzen yos. Pumbu tembar zenpe tenzen mabamba yoba tesi to. Nge lu se ne nga se lu te liya. Nengen se lu te liya takbu jengen se ne moyo tende. Nga zenpe nganzen de mabamba yoba sigara. Chisi pumbu zen yoba tesi de la nganzen yos. Nga ta ngai se samla te yo na. Ngai rwa tongche yu longche che su ta te ro re cha la soba. Tesu kanga la tene ngai se te ngo ra. Ngai longche che te kuku me te se ra. Tesu kanga yung ra. O te chisi pumbu zen yoba tisi te la nga zi yos. Nga zi yo na. Nga la kuya te kuku yo. Me kuya te kuwa me se ta. Langdo che te yung ra. Miga tonga sui nada, trai nada, o te ngā ko me, te awa me da, te awa do, te koe me se, te keche kanga yunga ra, besu che te yunga ra, le saya te yunga ra, te tonta le ga chigirwa, kane keche shegire, semke samlu tangire, lugi, chawa chigire, le sa su tu lunga yusumba to le saya ke yo mara, kane keche shetu le sa yo ra, semke samlu tangi le sa yo ra, sokwe kujia kiwa kari chigire, kewe samla kune lana kujia jabge nanda, meke samla kune lana kujia jabge nanda, chawada chidisa le sade yora. Te indi. Chisi pungu zin yoba tisi tila ngan zin yos. Nga nge sido ta nge tukcha yu, nge panja yu, nga lukundi kuya di, me kuya di isi. Ene lega chigira, semge samla tangire, te tonda tabshi chigira. Ti le sa yora. Le sa sido tira, chawa chiya tisi yora. Le kewa yora, me kewa yora, lumaten yora. Kashe kewa pe toya yora, kashe pe mada ne kenge yora, kashe pe ne me kenge lumaten ki le yora. O te yona ni le tili chukure se. Le sasu ne tele ten drebu ni te wata tunge yonga te yungu yora. Chisi pumpu zin yoba tisi tele nganzi yos. Nganzi yona yang le sagre se. Tele yana kiwa ya, tele teni yang kiwa ndramata. Le chikin drebu kiwa te sebe ina yang shanda chiki le kin drebu kiwa te langre se gora. O te indi ko. Pumpu temba zimba tenzi mabamba yoba tisi to nga temba zimba tenzi ya mabamba yore se. Tada dagi wa, pumpu sene dagi wa tera. 다스네 다들어 다다 다게와 라와도 여번 좀 받으시도 와 대연해서라 아니 레사 그래서 나진 연해 레 양래 됐어 날 고야 되도 뭐 고야 되도 스타 탑시지라 대화다 동행 연계지 요사도 그때 좀다 탑시지라 네 레디 온 거라서 텔레 안에 저네 레 상에게 와게 기도 녀에 때도 안에 르 상에는 거라 대화다 동행 녀에 때 식구가라 아니 미르세 녀에 있던 르르세로 가르라나 치라체 이런 거라 비서 나지 연해 양래 텔레 안에 교회 레서 waltene 교회 그래서 전다데 야 어디질라나
So here then this realization of emptiness, of the lack of some kind of inherently existent I and mine, this is the critical cause that we need for liberation. As long as we have that kind of grasping at an I and then grasping at a mine, we will continue to create karma and thereby take rebirth. So here in verse 35, as long as one grasps the aggregates, one will also grasp the I with regard to them. If one grasps the I, karma will be created again, and due to that karma, one will again be reborn. So here, when we are able to, if we have this kind of understanding that it is this grasping at an I and grasping at mine, that then leads us to engage with all of our afflictions and in turn create karma that continues this kind of wheel of rebirth. If we recognize that, then we understand that by developing this wisdom, realizing emptiness, realizing the lack of such a self of the person and phenomena, that this is how we pacify the afflictions, which in turn pacifies the creation of karma, and thereby there is no samsaric rebirth. So here, what we are turning to is describing the kind of stages of engaging in samsara and how one reverses that. So this sort of teaches how it is that we end up cycling in samsara due to this first grasping at an I, or in this case, actually grasping at the aggregates. Because as it says here, as long as one grasps the aggregates, one will also grasp the I with regard to them. So here, so long as we hold the five aggregates, our form, feelings, consciousness, discernment, and karmic formations, as long as we hold them to be really truly existent, we haven't eliminated the grasping at them as having that kind of true existent, then we will think of this I that we designate on the basis of those aggregates as also being truly existent. So it often comes we think of our body as being sort of autonomously, independently existent. It's really truly existent like that. We don't think about how it is all of our body is dependent upon various parts and various causes and conditions. I mean, when we begin to look at the various components, we can go all the way down to many billions of minute atoms, but we can't find something that we can point to and say, well, that is the body, that is the form aggregate. So as long as we have this kind of grasping at those aggregates as having this sort of true existence, then we will believe that this I is also sort of truly existent. So here, really all of the kind of efforts that we are making are based upon thinking in this way, that the sort of mind, the things that we enjoy, the things that we need and so forth, all of our efforts are going toward accomplishing these things. We need various things and we pursue them for this I that we perceive to be truly existent. We act, we speak, we are driven by that. So long as we have that kind of grasping, we are going to in turn create karma through the actions of our body, our speech, and so forth. And so whether it is a virtue or non-virtue. I mean, due to non-virtue, we are going to end up experiencing suffering. But we have, again, based upon this holding to the aggregates as being really truly existent, and then the I and the mine as truly existent, we think, well, I need this, I need to have that, and so forth. And due to that, we act in various ways, sometimes
Oh, yeah.
virtuously, but sometimes non-virtuously.
Oh,
And
that is.
from so here it is due to this process that we then take up this basis of experiencing suffering and happiness. No, 건다게.
Oh, yeah, this one.
나 디선.
당연히 데리다. 지시 본본쟁이 같은 세대를 가지고 가지 근데 양을해도 tel에 안에 끼와 있어야 돼. 그 거에 짜와된 거는 저기도 와. 거에 짜와. 거에 죽배는 버셔거라. 죽배는 버셔 다 거에 짜와도 가려서는 나다 나이와 때버리지 바로 나다 나이 삼사 전부터 거에 짜와래서 오라. 나진다. 나이와 나서랑 주어지 나이세 부부랑도 주어지 봐. 어쩌서 쓰기도 와. 이 코에 짜온 걸 생기도 와. 지시 풍분지 유바 뜻이 들어가지 유나 양을 돼. 때려야 내껴와 인세. 디펜션디 매터. 어. 디선.
어, 디선.
어야. 디체 다른데 가르셔도 쓰는 저러데. 풍부랑 신기 두 번째 봐요나. 그거 다다 풍부랑 신기 두 번째 봐요. 뜻이도 코에 짜와요. 대 코에 짜와 지그래서 와라. 결혼했더니 레서야다 가가 연구돼서 오라. 다 풍부할 때 다다다게 어떤 버트베 동바 도발할 때네 안에 traction ben제부터 그랬어. 년도 traction ben이나다 란제 traction ben이나다 티진 traction ben 상제 이나다 어떻게 간가 traction ben제부터 발라니 뭐 빵발라. 안에 동반이 또 그랬어. 된도 가서래. 직다 세고래. 다들 간사 단서들 거린 직다 시기도. 된 직다 세를 가르쳐 그랬으나 부부가 보던 직배랑 신체로 와. 기지개지근 직배랑 신체 지질을 떼지 되는 직된 게지로. 뒤나리 아닌 아서 라와시 용해도 요마로 와. 지단 직설을 따와서도. 소고이나다 세미나다 소아이나다 가가 단단단 유대거라. 미다만 유래랑 신체 규단 깨를 때는 유된 게지오라. 디나는 아세요. 근데 라와시 용신에 거래요 말아. 풍부란 될 사주상 풍부가 아까 보지 깨지깨지 뉴된 게 시오라. 대수단 되던 게 다한테 딱봐 라와시 용하면 라와시는 딱봐 차고라. 라와시. 근데 이거 말해서 했던데. 이거라서. 다시 뭐 풍부 템바지만 뭐 직다. 풍부 템바지만 마방바 요바테세도 어느 직다에 방금 말했어. 직다 마셔나 안에 다시 봐. 너무 타브라토 말해서라. 어때인데 bomboluduk je shebatende rese. Tendon bomboluduk je shungde nyande da ranje trachon bato zole toni to bo stale chenso. Uma ranje bala so kashe nyaran trachon bato zobe. Tongbani tamu to ko marese. O timare ten bomboluduk kombana shishana. Tarba to bala nya tengme na techen na karina tongbani to ko rese. Tese abishin shego rese. Ya tichila andis.
So here, this is again describing the kind of process by which we engage in samsara and get out of this. First, by talking about the engagement in samsara, and this begins with identifying then the root of samsara. So we need to understand what it is that drives this whole process. That so long as we have this feeling of I, or this grasping at an I, as it says here, as long as one grasps the aggregates, one will also grasp the I with regard to them. So once we have that kind of grasping at them as truly existent, then we will, as it says, if one grasps the I, karma will be created created again, and due to that karma, one will again be reborn. So here we experience all of the kind of suffering, the taking up of new aggregates and birth and so forth due to this grasping at an I. And so as long as we have that kind of grasping at true existence, one will continue to cycle. But by realizing the emptiness of that, here by recognizing that these don't actually exist as such. So in order to be freed from samsara, then one needs to realize the emptiness of true existence of those two. And this is what is being taught here. So even for arhats, those solid hearers and solitary realizer arhats, as well as bodhisattvas, it is necessary for them to realize emptiness, this most subtle kind of emptiness. Now, so here, this is based upon, and in this commentary by Gyaltsab Je, it also uses this term, this view of the perishable collection. So when we hold the aggregates to be truly existent, really the aggregates are something that are changing moment to moment. They are perishable. They are not something that is sort of static and permanent, but rather when we look at everything that composes our aggregates, our form, our feelings, and so forth, they are changing moment to moment to moment, which contradicts their having some kind of autonomous existence. If they had that sort of autonomous existence, they would be permanent, solid. They wouldn't have that kind of change. And so here, although it is the case that there are some of the Svatantrika school who would assert that it is not necessary for hearer and solitary realizer arhats to realize this most subtle emptiness, as is clear from this text, Arya Nagarjuna is asserting that it is absolutely necessary even for arhats that are hearers and solitary realizers to have this understanding of the most subtle emptiness.
Oh yeah. Tata mategi koya tsawang yusin barwa tata tagi wa tsawang tuwa. Ta kowa kursu di shego rade kowa kandis kurku yorese. Koya tsawa tele tene kowa kandis kurku yorese shego ra. Lamsum tonda u me basigdo. Lamsum che ane te toman dere u dere se chiglin zogu tsusa menge sigwa ra. Lamsum tonda u me ba. Tomada kiti direse, di tangbu dire, di niba dire, di sumbare, tende tsiya yo maru segura. Tome maru basine, tome maru ngeliya, niban duchi da kanga dogura, ko le sange chiwara. Chako taga se kiwachi koyo wandu chene, tome maru basine, niba se mado. Tome maru ngeli kage yo maru basine yora, di ngeli kiwa yora, maru ba le sange yora, oti sigora. Lamsum tonda u me base. Kowe kolo lamsum shera, ta yoda yungra ti kebudo. Lamsum yoda shera. Te toman dere, dere, kidin dere se nguzin tubya yo mare se ora. Kowe kengo geme ye, kengo shindo se, geme kolos do chide korshadu, kogo kutogura chikichili chi, te tambore de nibare se yo mara, o te nasi yora. Kowe kengur game ye, kengur tabu pensin ke kyuchen ni to kwara jose. Pensin chiki kyuche je kodo ure sigwara. Ti kare se ne, le she rwa, sumde, lam sumse sumde sigwara. Le she, kyawa che, nyamu che, ti sumde sigwara. Nyamu che, le she, kyawa sumde. O ti, nyamu le teni le sa gyora. Le sa ne kyawa lengi wara. Kyo lang bata ya nyamu chi gwara, ya tome marba chi gwara, tu chido di tambu dire, nipa dire, tachi du ngunzi che yo mara, tome marba ngundu kyo ndo sara, kyo lang kichi mene tome marba yung marwa. Kyo yona te tali ya ne nipa du chi de kanga yo kura, te tali ya shenda sura, ta tambu dine chung rese, kwa la toma merwa, kwa la toma mere, ta nima ne ko yo yo rima Toma dine chungre se che yo mare. Toma meja tama yo sera. O tati ya degdwas. Lamso tonda u meba koya jingu geme ye kolo tabu penzi ki kyuchen dine kuwara gyos. Kwa kursu di shara tatanda. Tome maribe niban doji ke saga chawra. Niban doji lela tene ya tome mariba chigra. Kya lambal tene ya tome mariba chigra. Ya tele tene chige chile roba chigra. Kya chi lambare tome mariba kunela lesa. Kya lambare ya tome mariba chigra. Sako zoe ke yo mare. Ta tangbo dire niban dire se. Zugu se yo mare se ora. Chige chige troche. Chige chige kigo ora. This is the course of the share. That the legend that under the court there is a discussion.
So here, talking about the kind of process by which one takes birth in samsara sort of spins, one could say. This is with an example, then comes in verse 36. With these three phases mutually causing each other, cyclic existence whirls around, like the circle formed by a whirling torch, without beginning, middle, or end. And so here, when it comes to this kind of way in which we take birth in samsara, as it says, these three phases, and it explains then in the text that this is referring to afflictions, karma, and birth. These three are like sort of like phases, one could say, but it's impossible to say what comes at the beginning, the middle, and the end. When we look at cyclic existence, I mean, we describe it in this way of ignorance. There's initial ignorance, but really, when we look at the way in which this proceeds, there's no way to point to like this is the beginning, this is the end. This we can point to a specific situation and say, well, this ignorance gave rise to this particular karma, which in turn one took this birth. But unless one had a birth, you weren't able to generate ignorance and then create those afflictions and engage in karma and so forth. And so really, we can't point to a beginning, a middle, and an end. These are mutually causing of one another. I don't know where Geshe went. And so cyclic existence whirls around like the circle formed by a whirling torch. So although, again, we can look at the process by which afflictions cause us to generate karma, which in turn causes us to take a rebirth, there's no sort of beginning to that. When we look at samsara, we can't say that there is a beginning point. Again, although we call it initial ignorance, without having a prior birth, we can't have the situation or the kind of conditions to have that ignorance and so forth. And so when it comes to this, it is said that there is no beginning to samsara and there is no end. I mean, there are specific ends, but basically this is an unending kind of a cycle, like the whirling of a firebrand, that you can't point to, well, this is the start of the circle, this is the end of the circle, and so forth, but rather each acts mutually as a cause for the other, and thereby we continue in this unending cycle. Yeah, I think Geshe is muted, but yes, I think we are up for the time today. And we do have a question, but we're going to try to address that in a future class, so I'll just note that.
Thank you, Katrina. Thank you very much, Geshe Ginla. Thank you very much. Thank you, Katrina, for your translation.
고기민두, 단다 고기민두, 계란기 키 숭.
Okay, just a reminder for our online audience that there will not be a class next week due to the 4th of July holiday, but we will resume on July 14th, Monday, July 14th at 9 a.m. So we'll finish with some dedication prayers.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of wholesome's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the three worlds always increase. Iram Guru Anamandala Niryatayami attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May the born have no decline, but increase forevermore.